Do you ever notice how certain words make an argument worse? In this video, I'm going to share 7 trigger words that codependent people need to avoid during conflict. And stay with me until the end where I give you the solution. But first, if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So when you struggle with codependency, anger feels really scary. It's almost always a trigger back to earlier childhood experiences where we may have had a family member rage or be very abusive towards us. So any type of anger can feel like a threat in our adult relationships. This often triggers us to want to fix it and control things that are outside of our control. So in this video, we're going to talk about what trigger words you need to avoid, because saying the wrong thing can actually escalate a conflict, and I don't want that for you. So the first trigger words you want to avoid during conflict is you should or you shouldn't. Codependent people are famous for wanting to control the other person's behavior. So during a conflict, you might find yourself saying you shouldn't do this or you should do it this way, because though we want to be helpful, it actually ends up being a sign of control. So this puts the other person on the defensive, because when we say you should or you shouldn't do something, we're really implying that we know better than them. And that is most often going to trigger an angry reaction in that other person. Nobody wants to be told how they should live their life. But when we're codependent, we tend to think we have other people's answers. If you can relate to this, say me too in the comments. You're not alone. This video is going to help. The next trigger word I want you to avoid during conflict is saying, I feel attacked. Now, really what you're saying is, I feel hurt. But when we use words like attacked, it really sets up that intensity that makes a conflict worse. And it makes the other person immediately come back and say, I'm not attacking you. What are you talking about? And it really makes a conversation go downhill fast. And the reason this happens is because the codependent person often feels like a victim, like everything is done to us. And I can relate to this. And part of what I needed to do is realize that, you know what, somebody has a right to say what they're going to say. And if I tell myself I feel attacked by them, I'm going to be a lot more upset. Versus if I say something to myself like, wow, what they're saying or doing right now is really hurtful, that's a more appropriate neutral term that not only will keep you calm, but keep the conversation healthy. Another set of trigger words you want to avoid is saying you always or you never. Because let's face it, when we're doing that, we're trying to prove our point. We're trying to be right. Because often when we're struggling with codependency, we have never had our reality and our feelings validated. So sometimes we go to extremes in adulthood, like saying things like, this always happens, you always do this, you never are supportive. And it's not actually true. And the other person knows it. So they're going to get really defensive and it's going to make the conflict worse. And I don't want that for you. Another set of trigger words I don't want you to use is saying you need to calm down. And even though this is understandable, because if the other person is really angry, we do want them to calm down. But the problem is that when that other person hears it, it feels like control. It feels like we're saying they shouldn't be angry. And if we think of ourselves and somebody tells us to calm down when we're upset, how does it feel? Usually it doesn't feel good. I know for me, I had this real recently with my husband where he told me I needed to calm down about something, and it got me more angry because I didn't want to be told what to do. I wanted to have my feelings. So it's really important during conflict, if somebody is escalating in their anger, that's the time to step away, not the time to try to control it. There's also a discomfort usually with emotional intensity because we don't want somebody to be angry with us. This is a very common sign of codependency, where we're people pleasers and we'll do almost anything to avoid somebody being mad at us. But that's not realistic in terms of long-term relationships, because sometimes people are going to be upset and that's okay. It doesn't mean anything is wrong or bad about you. Now, another set of trigger words I don't want you to say during conflict is, it's all my fault again. So this can be seen as sort of a passive-aggressive way of throwing yourself under the bus and taking too much responsibility. And sometimes this indicates that we're playing the martyr. because we're saying that it's all our fault. And that's never true. We always have a part in a situation, but never 100%. And part of where we struggle if we're codependent is we tend to take too much responsibility for things. Saying that it's all your fault can also really aggravate the other person because it's passive aggressive. It's really insinuating that you're the victim again, and that isn't going to go over well during the conflict. Because taking too much responsibility is often what we do in our codependency, and part of recovery is to learn how not to do that anymore. Another set of trigger words I want you to avoid is saying you need a timeout. This is super tempting to do when the other person is enraged. But again, when the other person is really upset during a conflict and maybe you don't feel safe, that's not the time to tell them what to do. And even though, yes, they probably do need to take a healthy timeout, they probably aren't willing to do that, especially after being told that's what they're supposed to do. So what I want you to do is use that as your warning sign to leave the situation. Because if that other person's anger is starting to bother you or scare you, I don't want you to stay in that situation anymore. I want you to leave. You can say something like, I need a break right now because I don't think this is going well. Make it about you instead of making it about the other person, because that is going to minimize the anger in the conflict. Another set of trigger words I want you to avoid is saying, let's move on. I don't want to talk about this anymore. This can often feel very dismissive on the receiving end, because when we're codependent, we really want to squash that conflict because we find it threatening. The problem is that it shuts the other person down and it makes them feel like they can't say anything because you don't want to go there. So if we try to brush over something really quickly or skip the subject or say, no, it's okay, I'll do whatever you want, let's just move on. Sometimes people in a conflict need to be heard. And part of what happens with codependent people is we want to shut that down because we're so afraid to hear what the other person is going to say. Because most likely we're assuming the worst. And in many cases, that's actually not the case. If we can take a breath and let the other person finish what their thought is, it can often lead to a better outcome. So you might notice that all of these trigger words have something in common. They're focusing on controlling or appeasing the other person. So in my codependency class that I'm going to be teaching soon, we're going to talk a lot about how you need to shift that focus off of what they're doing back onto yourself. Because the more we hyper-focus on what other people are doing, especially during conflict, the more powerless and out of control and scared we're gonna feel. Versus if we can turn that focus back on ourselves and say, okay, wait a minute, where am I emotionally in this moment? And what do I need to do to handle this? That's gonna go a lot better for you. Because we have no control over what that other person says or does, but we have 100% control over what we do. And that's where your power lies. So how can you handle conflict without using these trigger words? What I want you to do is I want you to consider practicing detachment. I want you to imagine putting a bubble over that other person and let them have their energy. And if you can, step back physically from them, because the more you can give yourself some space, the easier it's going to be for you to stay centered and not get caught up in their emotions. Because part of what detaching does is remind us that we are not responsible for what the other person is doing. We can actually shift that focus back to ourselves and realize that we can't control the outcome, and that's actually a good thing. Because if we can let go of that control and let whatever happen, you're going to be more at peace. So the next thing I want you to do is go watch my video on how to practice detachment, because that is your next step. Thanks so much.